His hands wouldn't stop shaking. The white paper trembled like a leaf in a storm, and everyone could see it. 50 guests stood frozen on my lawn, watching my husband of 5 decades unravel in real time. Inside that box I'd given him was more than paper. It was the end of everything he thought he owned, everything he thought he controlled, everything he believed was his by right. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the morning I turned 73. Welcome to Tea and Payback, where the tea is hot, the secrets are messy, and karma always finds her way home. Before I go on, just a quick reminder. I share new life stories every day. If you enjoy them, subscribing and liking the video would mean a lot to me. Now sit down, pour yourself a cup of tea, let's continue. My name is Helena. I'm 73 years old, and for most of my life, I believed my purpose was to hold other people up while they reached for the sky. The morning of my birthday arrived with the scent of fresh jasmine and the quiet hum of cicadas in the magnolia trees. I woke without an alarm at exactly 6 o'clock, the way I'd done every day for the past half-century. Sunlight filtered through the Spanish moss hanging from the old oaks, casting lace-like shadows across the wooden floors of the porch. This house, this sprawling estate on the edge of Savannah, was my cathedral. Every beam, every window, every carefully planned sight line was designed by my hands. A lifetime ago, I was an architect. Not just any architect, but one of the most promising young designers in the South. I had a commission that would have made my career, a state-of-the-art medical research center in downtown Charleston. The blueprints were approved. The funding was secured. I spent months perfecting every detail, every angle where light would touch stone. Then Raymond came to me with his brilliant idea. Import specialty reclaimed timber from Europe, corner the luxury market, build an empire. He needed capital. He needed my trust fund, the inheritance my grandmother left me specifically for my career. I gave him everything. The business collapsed in 11 months. The timber was poor quality. The contracts fell through. The investors disappeared. And I stayed behind, watching my career evaporate like morning dew. Instead of the research center, I built this house. I poured every ounce of unrealized ambition into these walls, these gardens, these perfect proportions. It became my masterpiece that no one except me ever recognized as one. Helena, where's my gray blazer? The one with the silver buttons. Raymond's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade through silk. He stood in the doorway, already dressed, already irritated, his eyes scanning the room for something I should have prepared for him. Not a word about my birthday. Not a glance at the hand-embroidered table linens I'd set out the night before. The ones my mother made for special occasions. 73 years old. 50 years together. To him, this was just another Friday morning. In the hall closet, I said without turning from the window. I steamed it yesterday. I knew he wouldn't notice the silver cake stand on the sideboard or the white roses I'd cut at dawn. He stopped noticing such things 30 years ago. To Raymond, I'd become part of the architecture. Functional, dependable, invisible, like the walls that held up his roof. You're my anchor, Helena, he'd say sometimes after his second bourbon. He loved that word. Anchor. He had no idea how accurate it was, or how heavy anchors become when they're dragging along the ocean floor. My phone buzzed. My older daughter, Simone. Mom, happy birthday, obviously. Listen, we're stuck in nightmarish traffic on I-16. Can you start prepping the appetizers? We can't have guests arriving to nothing ready. And please make sure Dad doesn't start drinking before we get there. You know what he's like. She spoke rapidly, like my birthday was an inconvenient scheduling conflict she needed to manage. I wasn't the guest of honor. I was the unpaid event coordinator. It's handled, Simone. Drive safely. I ended the call. There was no sting in my chest anymore. That part of me had gone numb years ago. There was only a smooth, glassy calm, like the surface of a pond that's frozen solid beneath. By 5 in the evening, the house was alive with people. Neighbors, old friends, Raymond's business partners, distant cousins. They arrived with flowers and wine, praising my lemon pound cake, marveling at the gardens, asking for my secret to the azaleas. I smiled and thanked them and played my part. The gracious hostess, the devoted wife, the southern matriarch who'd spent 50 years perfecting the art of making everyone comfortable while swallowing her own needs. Raymond was magnetic, the way he always was in crowds. He moved through clusters of guests like a politician working a fundraiser, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, telling stories where he was always the hero. He talked about the land development deal he was closing, the vacation property he was considering. My house, he'd say, gesturing at the gardens. My investment strategy. And no one corrected him. No one knew that this house, the Savannah property, the downtown loft, and every account with our names on it had been registered solely in my name. My father insisted on it before he'd give his blessing for the marriage. Protect yourself, Helena, he'd said. Men like Raymond are charming, but charm isn't collateral. My father was a wise man. My younger daughter, Brianna, arrived just after sunset. She was the only one who hugged me like she meant it, pulling me close and whispering, "You okay, Mama?" Her eyes searched mine. "I'm fine, sweetheart." I smiled, but Brianna knew me too well. She'd been watching her father with cold suspicion for months, seeing things the rest of the family refused to acknowledge. Then came the moment I'd been preparing for, the moment I'd rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. Raymond clinked his glass with a knife, calling for silence. Conversations died. Guests turned toward him, expecting a toast. He stood in the center of the stone patio, tall and distinguished at 75, silver hair gleaming in the lantern light, posture radiating the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "Friends, family," he began, voice booming across the yard. "Today we celebrate my dear Helena, my rock, the woman who stood beside me for half a century." He looked at me, and I saw nothing in his eyes but self-congratulation. "But tonight, I want to do more than toast her. I want to finally be honest with all of you, with myself, and with her." The air shifted. I felt dozens of eyes turned toward me. Brianna's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "For 30 years," Raymond continued, his voice thick with manufactured emotion, "I've lived 2 separate lives. And tonight, I want to make things right." He gestured toward the garden gate. A woman emerged from the shadows. Early 50s, expensively dressed, with sharp cheekbones and calculating eyes. I recognized her instantly. Veronica Tate. She'd worked under me at the architecture firm decades ago, before I gave up everything for Raymond's dream. Behind her were 2 younger people, a man in his late 20s and a woman in her mid-20s. Both had Raymond's nose, his jawline. Raymond walked to them, put his arm around Veronica, and led her directly beside me. So close I could smell her perfume, something aggressively floral and cloying. "Helena has been such a solid foundation," Raymond said, looking past me to address the crowd, "that I was able to build not just 1 life, but 2. A foundation this strong can support anything. So please meet the other half of my family, Veronica, and our children, Dominic and Natasha. It's time everyone knew the truth. It's time my whole family could finally stand together." He positioned Veronica next to me like we were posing for a portrait. His wife and his mistress, side by side, framed by the house I built. Simone made a choking sound. Brianna's nails dug into my palm. Laughter died mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. The silence that fell was so complete I could hear the Spanish moss swaying in the breeze. In that moment, something inside me didn't shatter. It clarified. It was like watching ice form across a lake. That final moment when liquid becomes solid, when movement becomes stillness. I felt a lock turn inside my chest, heavy and final. The door to my old life slammed shut with a sound only I could hear. I stood between my husband and his other woman, the bridge connecting 2 shores of his lie. The world had stopped spinning. I saw our neighbor Margaret, with her champagne flute suspended in midair. I saw my son-in-law go pale and step backward, as if explosion debris might hit him. The silence was thick enough to choke on. I turned my head slowly and smiled. Not a bitter smile. Not a wounded smile. The smile of a hostess acknowledging unexpected guests. Then I walked to the wrought iron side table where my gift sat waiting. A single box wrapped in cream-colored paper, tied with a charcoal ribbon. I'd spent hours choosing that paper a year ago when I first learned everything. It needed to be perfect, elegant, final. I picked up the box. It weighed almost nothing. I returned to Raymond, who watched me with confusion. His script was breaking down. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I know, Raymond, I said. My voice was steady, calm, barely above a whisper. This gift is for you. I held out the box. He hesitated, then released Veronica's shoulder and took it. His fingers brushed mine, warm and slightly damp. I pulled my hand away like I'd touched something contaminated. He stared at the box, then at me. Confusion flickered behind his eyes, quickly replaced by a condescending smirk. He probably thought it was a watch, a desperate gesture to save face. He pulled the ribbon. It fell to the ground like a dead snake. He tore the paper, movements suddenly jerky, less controlled than before. Under the wrapping was a plain white box. He opened the lid. I watched his face with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Inside me, where my heart used to be, there was only crystalline silence. He looked inside. At the bottom, resting on white satin, was a single brass key. Standard deadbolt key, freshly cut, smelling of metal shavings. Next to it, a sheet of heavy paper folded in thirds. Raymond pulled out the paper and unfolded it. I watched his eyes scan the words, first quickly, then slower, stumbling over each line like he was reading a foreign language. I knew those words by heart. I'd worked with my attorney for months perfecting them. Notice of dissolution of marriage due to sustained marital infidelity. Immediate freeze of all joint financial assets. Court order for restraining contact. Notice of property access termination for the following addresses: 1847 Whitaker Street, Savannah, Georgia. 290 River Street, Savannah, Georgia. His left hand started trembling first. A fine, barely visible shake that traveled up his wrist to his forearm. Then his right hand joined in. The paper rustled like wine through autumn leaves. He looked up at me. The self-satisfaction had evaporated. The triumph was gone. Looking back at me now was a confused, aging man whose world had just tilted off its axis. He tried to speak. His mouth opened, but only a dry rasp came out. He looked at the paper again, then the key, then back to me, searching my face for some sign this was a joke, a theatrical gesture, something he could talk me out of. But my face was a mask. I'd spent 50 years learning to hide my feelings, building this facade, this foundation he loved so much. And today, that mask held perfectly. Behind it was nothing. No pain. No love. No pity. Only cold, clear freedom. Veronica, standing beside him, understood nothing yet. "Raymond, what is it? What does that say?" She tried to peek at the document. He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me, watching his comfortable world, his secure life built on my money, my property, my silence, collapse in real time in front of everyone he wanted to impress. I held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then I slowly turned to Brianna, my girl, my only anchor. She was looking at me with tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of pity. They were tears of pride. I gave her a small nod. "It's time." She understood without another word. Her fingers locked around my forearm like iron. Together, we turned and walked toward the house. Not running, not fleeing, walking with our heads high, with dignity, away from the frozen tableau on the lawn. Guests parted before us like the Red Sea, avoiding eye contact, whispering behind their hands. I felt their stares on my back, a mixture of shock, pity, and, let's be honest, hungry curiosity. Raymond remained in the center of the patio, that white paper shaking in his hands, standing next to the woman he'd revealed to celebrate his own cleverness. His script had exploded. He had no power here anymore. We entered the house. I stopped in the foyer and turned back toward the open French doors, speaking loudly enough for everyone outside to hear. Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate with me today. Unfortunately, the evening is concluding now. Please enjoy the rest of the cake. Safe travels home. Simple, polite, final. No explanations. No tears. Just a gracious dismissal. The exodus began immediately. Hushed voices, hurried footsteps on gravel, car doors slamming. No one came inside to say goodbye. No one dared meet my eyes. 10 minutes later, the garden was empty except for abandoned plates and crushed flowers. I watched through the window as Raymond, finally snapping out of his paralysis, grabbed Veronica's arm and dragged her toward the gate. His movements were violent, angry. He practically hauled her and her bewildered children behind him, stumbling, looking back at the house with pure rage twisting his features. He wasn't the master anymore. He was a trespasser. When the last car disappeared down the oak-lined driveway, Brianna hugged me. "Mama, I'm all right, baby," I said, stroking her hair. "Everything is exactly as it should be. Help me clean up." We cleared the tables in silence, collected glasses, folded linens, threw away half-eaten appetizers. The familiar rhythm was soothing. Every movement was automatic, known. I washed the crystal stemware, the ones we'd received as wedding gifts 5 decades ago. Water washed away lipstick marks, wine residue. I felt like the water was washing away something else, too. 50 years of sticky cobwebs I'd mistaken for love. Brianna worked beside me, occasionally glancing at me with concern, waiting for me to break down. But I was calm. Inside me was quiet and empty. No pain, no resentment, only massive, cool relief. Like I'd been carrying an unbearable weight my entire life, and had finally set it down. It was nearly midnight when we finished. The house was clean and silent again. Mine. I made us chamomile tea from the garden. We sat on the porch wrapped in quilts, watching stars emerge in the black velvet sky. Then my phone vibrated on the wicker table, sharp and jarring. Brianna picked it up. Raymond's name glowed on the screen. The call went to voicemail. A notification appeared seconds later. Brianna looked at me questioningly. I nodded. She put it on speaker. His voice shattered the peaceful night, distorted with rage, breaking into a shriek. "Helena, have you lost your D***MN mind? What kind of circus did you just pull? You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. Is this your pathetic tantrum? Your petty revenge? Have you gone completely senile? I'm trying to check into a hotel, and my cards are blocked. My cards. Do you understand what you've done?" He was choking on fury. In the background, I heard Veronica's voice trying to calm him. "Raymond, please, don't talk like that. Don't talk like that," he screamed. She left me with nothing. "Helena, I don't know what kind of crisis you're having, but I'm giving you until morning. Call the bank and tell them it was a mistake. A stupid joke. Otherwise, I swear, you'll regret this. Do you hear me? You will bitterly regret this. Fix this before it's too late." The message ended. Silence flooded back. Even the night insects seemed to have stopped. Brianna stared at me, face pale. "Mama." I lifted my teacup slowly. My hands were perfectly steady. I took a sip. The chamomile tasted clean and herbal. "He still doesn't understand," I said quietly. "He and Veronica both think this is a tantrum. A hysterical woman's bluff that'll end by sunrise when I come to my senses. They didn't see the planning, the preparation, the year of cold calculation that turned my hurt into something harder than diamond. They only saw what they wanted to see, an aging, wounded wife who dared to make a scene. They still think they're in control." I looked at Brianna. Her eyes held the same question Raymond's voice had screamed. "What now?" I set my cup down. The porcelain clicked against wood, the only sound in the night. "I have a meeting with my attorney at 10 tomorrow morning," I said. "I want you there with me." My voice was level. Inside me there were no doubts. Raymond's furious message didn't frighten me. It only made my resolve stronger. Like a blacksmith plunging red-hot steel into ice water, His words tempered my will into something unbreakable. The drive into Savannah the next morning was silent. Brianna drove, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road. I watched the coastal Georgia landscape blur past, live oaks draped in moss, but I didn't really see it. I only saw his face, bewildered, flushed with rage, twisted with incomprehension. He still believed this was fixable, that I'd made an error, like forgetting to pay a bill, something that could be corrected with a phone call and an apology. He didn't realize yesterday wasn't the beginning. It was the ending I'd been building toward for 12 months. Attorney Marcus Pemberton's office occupied the third floor of a restored antebellum building on Bull Street. Heavy mahogany doors, the scent of old leather and lemon oil, walls lined with law books. Marcus himself matched his office perfectly. Mid-60s, silver-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd worked with my father decades ago, which is why I'd sought him out. I knew he'd understand what needed to be done. He greeted us at the door, led us to a conference table, offered coffee. We both declined. "Helena," he began once we were seated, his tone professional and measured. "As we discussed, all initial legal notices have been delivered. Assets are frozen. Restraining orders are filed. The process is moving forward. Has Raymond or anyone representing him attempted contact?" "A voicemail," I said calmly. "Threats. Accusations of hysteria." Marcus nodded like he'd expected exactly that. "Predictable. He hasn't grasped the severity yet. He's still operating under his old assumptions of power. That will change shortly." He paused, folding his hands on the polished table. His expression hardened. "Helena, we initiated standard dissolution proceedings. But there's something else. When you first came to me, out of respect for your father's memory, I took it upon myself to conduct a deeper investigation. I needed to understand exactly what we were dealing with. What I found goes far beyond infidelity. This represents calculated, premeditated action directed specifically at destroying you." He opened a drawer and removed a slim folder. No label. He placed it in front of me. "I'm legally obligated to inform you of this. It changes everything." Brianna's hand found mine. I stared at the folder, not moving. "What is it?" I asked. Marcus opened the folder and slid several pages toward me. "This is a copy of a petition your husband filed 2 months ago with Chatham County Mental Health Services. An official request for a compulsory psychiatric evaluation to determine your mental competency." Time stopped. I heard Brianna gasp, but I just stared at the document. Official letterhead, typewritten text, and at the bottom, Raymond's sprawling signature. "This is the first legal step," Marcus continued, his voice distant now, like he was speaking through water, "required to have someone declared incompetent, to obtain guardianship over them and, consequently, complete control over all their assets." I picked up the top sheet. It was a list of alleged symptoms Raymond claimed to have observed. I began reading. "Frequently misplaces personal belongings. Cannot locate her reading glasses, car keys, or important documents, indicating progressive short-term memory loss. I remembered searching for my reading glasses last week, only to find them pushed up on my head. Brianna and I had laughed about it. Demonstrates confusion in daily tasks. Recently confused salt and sugar while cooking, creating potential safety hazards for herself and others. I'd once, distracted while on a phone call, put salt in the sugar bowl. I'd noticed 30 seconds later and corrected it. Raymond had made a joke about it. He wasn't joking. He was documenting. Shows signs of social withdrawal and depression. Refuses to engage with friends. Spends excessive time alone in the garden talking to plants, suggesting detachment from reality. My garden. My sanctuary. The only place I could breathe. He'd weaponized even that against me. I kept reading. Every line was poison. Every innocent moment distorted. Every natural sign of aging twisted into evidence of mental collapse. Every tired afternoon, every forgotten appointment, every moment of distraction, all of it catalogued, inverted, fashioned into a weapon aimed at my throat. My hands resting on the table didn't shake, but I felt the warmth drain from my fingers. Cold crept up my palms, my wrists, my forearms. Like my blood was retreating inward, leaving ice behind. I looked up, past Marcus, out the window. 3 stories below, life continued. People walked dogs. Traffic moved. Tourists took photos. The sun was shining. But for one crystalline moment, all that busy, noisy world froze. And in that frozen silence, I understood. This wasn't infidelity. Infidelity is emotional betrayal. This was something else entirely. Complete, cold, calculated erasure. He didn't just want to leave me for another woman. He wanted to destroy me. Strip me of my home, my money, my independence, my mind, my identity. He wanted to turn me into a voiceless ghost locked in a facility, somewhere while he and his true love enjoyed everything I'd built with my life. The last ember in my soul, the one I'd perhaps unknowingly saved for him, some fragment of pity or shared history, didn't just go out. It crystallized into ice. I slowly placed the documents back on the table, aligning them perfectly. I looked at Marcus, then at Brianna's pale, frightened face. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. My voice was unchanged, but something in it had shifted. Something permanent and final. Now I see the complete picture. What are our next steps? Marcus Pemberton moved with surgical precision. While Brianna and I drove back to the house, his couriers were already fanning across Savannah. His paralegals were calling banks. The machine I'd spent a year building was now fully operational. The first blow found Raymond, where he least expected it, having breakfast in an overpriced hotel restaurant, probably still planning how he'd magnanimously forgive my outburst once I crawled back apologizing. A man in a tailored suit approached their table and silently placed a thick envelope in front of Raymond. Inside weren't just divorce papers. There was a court-issued restraining order prohibiting him from approaching or contacting me except through legal counsel. A separate injunction barring him from entering any property registered in my name, and a detailed accounting of every asset he believed was ours that was, in fact, solely mine. I can imagine his face, the condescending smirk melting away, replaced by crimson rage. He probably crumpled the papers, threw them down, shouted about his rights, about how half of everything belonged to him. He still believed it. After 50 years standing on my foundation, he genuinely believed he owned the ground beneath his feet. Reality hit him next like a freight train. They drove to the River Street loft. He probably intended to force his way in, establish dominance, prove who was really in charge. Instead, he stood in the hallway, uselessly jamming his key into a new lock. The key didn't fit. It would never fit again. He could knock, ring the bell, scream. That door, the one I'd chosen and paid for 15 years ago, was now a barrier he couldn't cross. I was at the house when the locksmith arrived. An older man, efficient and quiet. He worked quickly, removing the old locks from the gate and both doors. Every turn of his screwdriver, every click of the new mechanism was a symphony, the sound of purification. I wasn't being vengeful. I was disinfecting my home. The final, most devastating blow happened on River Street. As Raymond, exhausted and furious, prepared to leave and regroup, a tow truck pulled up behind his car. His gleaming black Lexus, the one I'd given him for his 70th birthday. 2 workers in reflective vests efficiently hooked the vehicle up and began lifting it onto the flatbed. Raymond ran toward them, waving his arms, yelling about theft. But the driver silently handed him the paperwork. Official repossession notice. Return of property to lawful owner. My name was on that paper. Helena Ashford Whitmore. Owner. I imagined Veronica's face in that moment. Standing on the sidewalk, watching the symbol of their security slowly disappear down the street. Blocked credit cards are an inconvenience. Divorce papers are embarrassing. A locked door is insulting. But when your car is towed in front of you, when you're left standing on a sidewalk with no money, no home, and no transportation, that's when reality sinks in. That's when her condescension turned to terror. She looked at her man, helplessly shouting after the tow truck, and she understood. They weren't dealing with a wounded, crying old woman. They'd collided with something cold, silent, and absolutely methodical. An executioner who didn't shout or threaten, but simply systematically severed every thread connecting them to their comfortable world. The panic came later that evening, I assume. That suffocating, animal panic of people who suddenly realize they have nothing. They were probably crammed into a budget motel or a relative's spare room. Raymond still raging, promising lawsuits, swearing he'd fix everything. And Veronica, more pragmatic, sharper, doing the math. The house was mine. The loft was mine. The accounts were mine. The cars were mine. Everything they'd assumed was ours. Everything they'd built 30 years of plans around was dust. They'd constructed their entire lives on my foundation without bothering to check who held the deed. I imagined their argument. His voice full of rage and impotence, hers full of fear and accusation. You said everything was secure. You promised she couldn't do anything. We should have moved faster with the doctors, with the evaluation. They didn't lose yesterday at my birthday party. They lost 2 months ago when he signed that petition. He'd handed me the weapon himself. Shown me this wasn't about marriage or love or even betrayal. This was about survival. And I'd accepted the rules of his war. Brianna called me late that night. Her older sister, Simone, had phoned her in hysterics. Dad called. Simone sobbed into the phone. He's losing his mind. He says Mom's gone crazy, that you're manipulating her, that she threw him onto the street with nothing. Brianna, what's happening? He's our father. We have to do something. Brianna's response was ice cold. Where were you, Simone, when he stood his mistress next to Mom on her own birthday? Where were you when he humiliated her in front of everyone she knows? Simone stammered something about needing to talk, about how you can't just destroy someone's life like this. She, like her father, couldn't see the depth. She only saw disruption of the familiar order. I took the phone from Brianna. Simone, I said calmly, don't worry about your father. He's simply learning to be independent for the first time in 50 years. It's character building. I hung up without waiting for her reply. I slept soundly that night, better than I had in years. I knew this wasn't over. I knew their panic would evolve into desperation. And desperate people are capable of anything. I knew they'd come for me. One final, ugly battle. And I was ready. I wasn't going to hide. The life I was reclaiming wasn't meant to be lived behind locked doors in fear. 3 days after the attorney meeting, I decided to walk to the farmer's market near Forsyth Park. I needed fresh produce, good bread, maybe some local honey. Brianna offered to go instead, but I gently declined. This was my city, my life. I wouldn't be imprisoned by fear. The day was beautiful, warm and breezy, smelling of salt air and blooming Confederate jasmine. I walked slowly, enjoying simple things. Sunlight on my face, the weight of my canvas bag on my shoulder, the solid feel of cobblestones under my feet. I bought everything I needed. Sourdough loaf, farm eggs, peaches. Nothing extraordinary. Just life. They were waiting by the exit. An unfamiliar car, old and dented, probably borrowed, lurched to the curb. Raymond practically fell out of the passenger side. Veronica followed, slower but with the same predatory determination. They looked terrible. Raymond wore the same gray blazer from my birthday, now wrinkled and stained. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Veronica's usually immaculate appearance was gone. Her hair was unwashed. Her face was drawn and gray. The polish had cracked, revealing desperation underneath. They blocked my path. Helena, Raymond began. His voice mixed rage with pleading. We need to talk. You can't do this. You just can't. I looked at him silently, grocery bag in hand. I felt no fear, only mild curiosity, like a biologist observing an insect. You've cut off everything. Everything. How am I supposed to live? You threw me out like garbage after 50 years. 50 years of our life together. Do you even understand what you're doing? He gestured wildly, trying to draw attention from passing shoppers. A few people glanced over, but seeing a typical domestic dispute, they quickly looked away. I remained silent. Let him exhaust himself. I knew that beneath the anger was only terror. Seeing his rage making no impact, he shifted tactics. His shoulders slumped. His voice softened, took on pathetic, begging tones. Sweetheart, remember when we were young? When we built that house together? When we raised our girls? Does none of that matter? Can you really erase everything in one day? This is our history. Our life. I made mistakes. I admit it. But is it worth destroying everything? Think about our children. Our grandchildren. What will we tell them? He tried to look into my eyes, searching for a spark of the old Helena. The one who always forgave. The one who always sacrificed. The one who always put his comfort above her own dignity. But that Helena was dead. He'd killed her himself 2 months ago when he wrote those lies about my sanity on official paper. Veronica, realizing his pleas weren't working, stepped forward. Her eyes were sharp, cold. Helena, she said, trying to maintain composure but barely concealing her hatred. Think whatever you want about me. Hate Raymond if you need to. But did you consider my children? What did they do wrong? My son just graduated from Emory. He's trying to start his career. My daughter is planning her wedding. You're destroying their futures. Whatever you think about us, they're his children too. They have a right to his support. You're not just punishing him. You're punishing them. Do you even have a heart? She tried appealing to guilt, to maternal instinct, their final card. They thought I, like any normal woman, couldn't resist the suffering of innocent children. I listened patiently. Let them empty themselves completely. His rage, his pathetic nostalgia, her manipulative guilt. I looked at their desperate faces and felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. No pity. Only cold, crystalline clarity. When they finally fell silent, exhausted, a brief pause settled. I could hear a trolley bell in the distance. Somewhere nearby, children were laughing. The world kept turning, indifferent to our small drama. I shifted my gaze from Veronica to Raymond. I looked directly into his eyes, deep enough that he'd know I saw through him. Saw his cowardice, his weakness, his rot. Then I asked my question. Almost a whisper, but every word landed like a hammer on glass. Was it your idea, Raymond, or hers to have me declared incompetent? It wasn't an accusation, just a question, but it hit them like a physical blow. I watched the blood drain from Raymond's face. He turned ashen. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. He instinctively stepped backward like I'd thrown acid at him. Veronica froze. Her eyes went wide with horror. The mask of noble motherhood shattered instantly, revealing the trapped predator beneath. They both stared at me with the same animal fear, the fear of exposure. And in that moment, they stopped being a team. They looked at each other, and in their eyes wasn't trust. It was suspicion, blame. Did you tell her? Did you let it slip? Their pathetic alliance, built on lies and calculations, cracked right there on the sidewalk. I didn't wait for an answer. The answer was written on their faces. I simply walked around them, the way you'd walk around obstacles in your path, and continued toward home. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard their deafening silence. They remained standing on that sidewalk, crushed, destroyed by a single question. I walked home gripping my bag of bread and peaches. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was returning not to a fortress under siege, but simply home. Their desperation, as I'd predicted, evolved into something uglier. Cunning, dirty, pathetic, but predictable. 2 days later, Simone called. She was crying. "Mom, please," she sobbed into the phone. "Dad is devastated. He'll do anything just to talk. Uncle Roland is coming. Aunt Claudette. Everyone's so worried. Let's meet at my place, all of us together, calmly, as a family. Please, Mom. For me." I knew it was a trap. The family meeting was their final stronghold. One last attempt to stage a performance where they were the victims and I was the deranged old woman led astray by my scheming younger daughter. They were assembling an audience, a jury of relatives whose opinions they believed they could still control. "All right, Simone," I said evenly. "Brianna and I will be there." "What time?" Relief flooded Simone's voice. She had no idea I wasn't coming to negotiate. I was coming to end this once and for all. We arrived at Simone's condo exactly at 7 o'clock. Her normally warm, bustling home greeted us with oppressive, suffocating silence. In the living room, arranged on sofas and chairs, sat the assembled jury. Raymond's brother Roland and his wife. My cousin Claudette. Simone's husband and their teenage son. They all looked at us with expressions of awkward concern and hungry curiosity. Raymond and Veronica sat center stage on the main sofa. They'd rehearsed this. He was hunched forward, hands covering his face like a suffering tragic hero. She sat beside him, eyes reddened, expression mournful, occasionally stroking his shoulders sympathetically. They'd already worked the room, told their version, set the stage. Now it was my turn to play the villain. Brianna and I sat in chairs directly across from them. I placed my leather handbag quietly on the floor. Raymond lifted his head. I had to admit, his acting was impressive. Genuine anguish trembled in his voice. Helena. Family. He spoke slowly, painfully, like each word cost him dearly. I gathered you all because we're witnessing a tragedy. A terrible tragedy. Something's happened to my wife, to our mother. I don't know what's changed, but lately she's become different. Forgetful. Paranoid. She hides things. Talks to herself. Her actions make no sense. What happened at her birthday, what she's doing now, this isn't her. It's illness. He looked at me with such concern, such manufactured compassion, that someone unfamiliar with the truth might actually believe him. I understand this is shocking, Veronica added, her voice quiet and trembling. Raymond and I didn't want to believe it either. We've tried to help, but she won't listen to anyone. Her suspicions are growing worse every day. And what's most heartbreaking, she paused, shooting a quick, poisonous glance at Brianna, is that Brianna is taking advantage of this situation. She's turned her mother against everyone. Against her father. Against her own sister. She's manipulating her to seize all the assets. The account freezes, the lock changes. Helena would never have thought of these things herself. This is all Brianna. She's isolated her mother, and now she's doing whatever she wants. We're terrified for Helena. We just want to help her before it's too late. She finished and leaned into Raymond's shoulder, the picture of helpless desperation. Silence filled the room. Everyone stared at Brianna and me, waiting for denials, tears, explanations, outbursts. I remained silent. I simply looked at Brianna. Brianna understood my look without words. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue. She simply reached down, pulled a slim folder from my handbag, and placed it on the coffee table in the center of the room. The sound of paper touching the lacquered wood was deafening. Here, Brianna said, her voice calm and crystal clear. Aunt Claudette, Uncle Roland, this is the petition my father filed 2 months ago. A formal request to have my mother declared mentally incompetent. It describes in detail how she talks to plants, how she confuses basic ingredients, how she's losing her mind. She opened the folder. The relatives leaned forward. Roland took the top sheet and began reading. His expression slowly changed, hardening into something cold. He passed the paper to his wife. Aunt Claudette put on her reading glasses, squinting at the text. Raymond jumped to his feet. That's taken out of context. Brianna, what are you doing? I filed that out of concern. I was trying to help her. Sit down, Dad, Brianna said in that same glacial tone. We're not finished. She reached into the handbag again. This time she pulled out a small digital voice recorder. She placed it beside the folder. You talk about paranoia and manipulation, she said. I think we should hear the truth. For the past 6 months, knowing something was wrong, I occasionally recorded Dad's visits when he came to the house alone, supposedly to check on Mom. He talked on the phone a lot. He thought no one was listening. She pressed play. Raymond's face turned the color of old newspaper. Veronica's fingers dug into the sofa cushion. From the tiny speaker came a voice. His voice, slightly distorted but absolutely recognizable. Yeah, Veronica, listen. Tomorrow when you meet with Dr. Patterson, Make sure you emphasize the glasses. Tell him she searches for them multiple times a day. And the keys. It's textbook. They eat this stuff up. A pause. The click of a lighter. No, don't exaggerate. The key is consistency. Not just once, but constantly. Say she's become withdrawn, disinterested in everything, just sits in that garden all day. The more small, believable details, the better. We need to paint a complete picture of mental deterioration. I watched Raymond's brother slowly lift his eyes from the document and look at him with an expression reserved for something truly vile. Brianna fast-forwarded slightly and pressed play again. Veronica's voice, quiet, ingratiating. Raymond, are you absolutely sure this will work? It's taking so long. Raymond's reply, tired, cynical, dripping with contempt. Relax. A few more months and everything becomes ours. The golden goose finally stopped laying eggs. Time to butcher her and take the nest. Brianna switched off the recorder. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. It pressed on our ears, made breathing difficult. Even the antique clock on the mantel seemed to stop ticking. Raymond stood in the middle of the room, mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Veronica stared at the recorder with the horror of someone watching a venomous snake coiled to strike. Roland, Raymond's brother, was first to break. He slowly stood, threw the papers onto the table, and looked at Raymond not with anger, but with infinite, frozen contempt. "You're no longer my brother," he said quietly, clearly. He took his wife's arm, and without looking at anyone else, they walked toward the door. Aunt Claudette removed her glasses with trembling hands. She looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears of shame. "Helena, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "So deeply sorry." She too walked to the door. Their social world didn't just crack. It disintegrated, turned to ash in seconds, crushed under the weight of that brief recording. They were left standing alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of their lives. Simone sat in the corner, crying silently, her face buried in her hands. Brianna and I stood. I picked up my handbag. We didn't say a word, just turned and walked toward the exit, leaving them alone with their shame. We stepped out of Simone's building into the cool evening air. The door clicked softly behind us, sealing off the past. We didn't look back. We walked silently to Brianna's car, got in, and without speaking, she started the engine. We drove through the glowing lights of nighttime Savannah, and the car was silent. But it wasn't the tense silence that had filled Simone's apartment. It was the silence of relief, like after a long, terrible fever finally breaks and all that remains is exhaustion and clarity. There were no more calls from Raymond. No more calls from Simone. No one else tried to reason with us or save them. Their world, built on lies and manipulation, had collapsed. And we were no longer part of it. 6 months have passed since that night. My new condo sits on the 14th floor of a modern building overlooking Forsyth Park. The windows face west, and every evening I watch the sun set behind the historic district, painting the sky in impossible colors. Deep rose to burning gold to soft lavender. There's no heavy, oppressive furniture here holding memories of other people's lies. Only clean white walls, light oak shelving, and space. So much space. So much air. I sold the house without hesitation. The buyer was a young couple with a toddler. They were enchanted by the gardens. "This house feels happy," the wife said, running her hand along the porch railing. I smiled. "It is happy. It was just tired of being taken for granted." Selling wasn't a loss. It was liberation. I released my beautiful but too heavy masterpiece so I could finally learn to fly. My days belong only to me now. On Wednesdays, I attend a ceramics workshop in the Arts District. I love the feeling of cool, responsive clay in my hands. I'm not trying to create perfection. I'm just letting forms emerge naturally. The wheel spins, the clay responds to my fingers, and from shapeless earth comes a bowl, a vase, a whimsical sculpture. There's something profoundly healing in this, taking dust and creating something whole. Last week, I went to the symphony at the Savannah Civic Center. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. I sat in a plush velvet seat in the dimmed hall, and when the first powerful piano chords swept through the space, I closed my eyes. I once dreamed of designing halls like this, creating spaces where musical miracles could be born. That life never happened. But sitting there, listening to that genius music, I felt no bitterness about lost opportunities. I felt gratitude, because I was finally in that hall not as an architect, not as someone's wife or mother, but simply as a listener, a participant in the miracle. And that was enough. More than enough. Brianna and I see each other often. She stops by after work. We drink jasmine tea and talk not about the past but about books we're reading, exhibitions we've seen, the amusing thing that happened on the streetcar. Her face no longer carries constant worry for me. She's at peace. She sees I'm thriving. Yesterday, she brought me a small gardenia plant in a terracotta pot. "So you can have your little garden here too," she said, smiling. Now it sits on my windowsill, and its white, porcelain-perfect flowers fill the room with subtle, sweet fragrance. Sometimes, rarely, I hear fragments of rumors about that other life. That Raymond is living in a rented room somewhere near the port. That Veronica left him, took her children, moved to Charleston. That he tries borrowing money from old acquaintances, but no one responds to his calls. I listen without satisfaction, without curiosity, with the same detached feeling you have reading a newspaper about events in a distant country. Those people have no connection to me anymore. They're characters from a book I've closed and placed on the highest shelf. Revenge is too consuming an emotion. It burns you from inside, and I don't want to burn anymore. I just want to live. This morning I woke early, as always. The sun was just rising, and its rays flooded my room with golden light. I made myself French press coffee, stepped onto the balcony, and watched the city wake below. Cars hummed. Tiny figures of people hurried somewhere, each with their own life, their own story. For 50 years, I was the foundation, reliable, strong, invisible. Others built their lives on top of me. Their walls, their roofs, their dreams all stood on me. I absorbed all the weight, all the impact, all the storms. I thought that was my purpose, my calling. But I was wrong. A foundation is only part of a building, and I am the whole building, with my own floors, my own windows facing the sun, my own roof over my head. A building I've finally started constructing for myself. I took a sip of hot, fragrant coffee. The morning air smelled of salt and possibility. Ahead of me stretched no obligations, no debts, no chains. Only silence. And in that silence, I finally heard myself. At 73, my life has just begun.